Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechta Zevachim daf Dalid. We're going to begin on the very top of Dalid Amud Aleph. Minolim de'einan zvich l'shma. So we know when it comes to the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, there's actually 4 steps in the process of a typical carbon. The first one is the shchita, or the slaughtering of the animal. We will be makabel the blood. We catch it in a klishares, in a special vessel. We then transport it to the mizbeach, which is halacha, and then finally we do the zrika. We pour the dam, depending on the type of carbon, depends on how it's done on the mizbeach. Now, it's necessary that these different steps have to be done lishma, as we saw already at the beginning of our masechta, that when it comes to a carbon, there's numerous things you have to have the right intention for. Certainly one of them is that you are bringing the right carbon. Namely, if you have the intention to bring a ola, you shouldn't have the thought process for it to be a shlomim. And we had a machlokas in the Mishnah, at what situations will we say it's still kosher, but it doesn't work for the owner, or it's just flat out puzzle, for example, like a chatas. So again, the Gemara asks, how do we know that when it comes to the shechita, it needs to be done l'shma? So, and Rashi throws in the word l'chatchila. Yomi kra, because the pasuk says, and we're going to quote all these psukim in Vayikra Gimel, V'im zevach shlomim karbanai. If when it comes to the carbon you're bringing as a shlomim, imin habakar hu makriv. If it's from cattle, im zachar, im nekeva, whether it's male or female, because a shlomim, unlike an ola, shlomim could be a male or female. And this is talking about a carbon yachid, as we saw already at the end of the first parak. When it comes to a carbon tzibor, every carbon is a zachar, is a male carbon. There's no such thing as a carbon nekeva, a female animal, when it comes to a carbon tzibor. So this is a yachid is bringing a shlomim. He could bring it as a zachar or nekeva. It must be tamim. It cannot have a blemish. Yakrivenu lefnei Hashem. So says the Gemara, it's telling you that you have to have the right intention. It has to be for the carbon shlomim. V'dilma hainu shemayu. Maybe it's just telling you that that's its name. The name of the carbon is zevach shlomim. That's just what it's called. It's not really called a shlomim. It's a zevach shlomim. So how do we know that that word is like extra to tell you that the zvicha must be l'shem shlomim? Minachziv hamakriv is dam hashlomim. But the fact that it says hamakriv is dam hashlomim, which is a later pasuk in Perek Zayin, that when a person brings close the blood of the carbon shlomim, as well as the chelev mimnei aron lo tiyeshay kayom in lamana, so it's supposed to be as an offering. So what do we learn out from here? So it says hamakriv es dam hashlomim. That basically what that means is that you have to have intention that it is a shlomim. Hazarik es dam shlomim. It has to be the fact that you're doing zrika with the blood of a shlomim. V'lo of zevach. And it doesn't say the word zevach. So it's interesting that in this pasuk, it only says the word shlomim, and in the other pasuk it says zevach shlomim. So it must be that the word zevach is not the name of the carbon. It's not a zevach shlomim, it's just a shlomim. So the fact that over here it doesn't say it, right? So the word zevach is obviously coming to teach us this din. That is the chiddush from that word zevach. Okay. So Shema Minah Shadei Zvicha L'Shem Shlom. So Ashkan Zvicha Shar Avodas Manon. How do we know when it comes to the other 3 avodas? V'chi Tema Le'av Mizvicha. Why don't we learn out just like Shchita Mazvicha? It has to be Lishma. So too all the other avodos. No, because Mal Zvicha, the Shchita is different. Shachin Nefselas Shlo L'Shem Oichlin BePesach. So when it comes to the carbon Pesach, says Rashi, She'im Shachtan Shlo Oichlin. Let's say you shechted it not for someone who you had designated to eat this carbon. If you had intention for someone who's just impossible for them to eat because they're sick, they're old, then the carbon is possible. Even if he owns this carbon, it doesn't matter. He has to be fit to eat it. which is interesting because the achila is actually not ma'akev when it comes to the carbon Pesach, which a lot of people don't know, but that's what the Gemara Pesachim says. But at the shash shchita, it has to be fit that person is shaykh to be able to eat the carbon. We don't find this when it comes to any other carbon, any other avoda, I should say. And we went out from that word in Gemara Pesachim says it's a lashon sursi. We don't have this din when it comes to zrika that if it's not shaykh for the person to eat it, then the b'shas zrika, then it's possible. It's only b'shas shchita. So in other words, let's say, for example, a person was able to eat it b'shas shchita, and then for whatever reason he's not able to eat it afterwards, he got sick or something like that in between, before the zrika, and then the zrika was done not for his, and someone who's not shaykh to do, it doesn't make any difference, it's still a kosher carbon. So we see that this is a chumrah, dafka by zrika. So maybe dafka by dafka by shchita. So maybe you think only by shchita, the din is it has to be lishma. So you can't learn out the other avodas from it. El Omer Kram, so the pasuk says, Hamakriv is dam hashlamim, shtei kabol l'shem shlamim. So we go back to the pasuk we quoted, that when it comes to being makriv, the dam shlamim, the kabbalah needs to be l'shem shlamim. So v'lichtaf lana b'kabbalah, v'lev shchita minei. So understand, so why does it say this by kabbalah and learn out shchita from it? So fine. So we're going to use this pasuk to tell us that the din is that by shar avodos, it needs to be lishma. So why don't we learn out from here that it needs to be lishma, even though it's more kal, and then you can learn out from shchita, of course it needs to be lishma. You don't need anything to tell us by shchita. Mishum de igel mifrach malul kabbalah shchem psul b'zar v'isha. When it comes to kabbalah, anything after shchita cannot be done by a non-kohen. However, the shchita, as we saw in the Gemara in Brachos regarding Shmuel, when he paskin to Eli, and he was actually Chai Misa, the Gemara over there says, in the 5th parak, that a non-Kohen is allowed to do the shchita. So therefore, you're right, on some level it does have a chomer, like by Karmen Pesach, but it has a huge kula that even a non-Kohen or a woman is able to do the shchita. So therefore, you need a pasuk to teach us that shchita has to be lishma and the sharabonos. So ashkon shchita v'kabal. 1 second, but that pasuk that we quoted is only referring to the mikabel dam, because you're being makriv the dam shlom, means you're being makabel the blood. How do we know zrika menolan? How do we know the blood being sprinkled that has to be lishma? V'chitelef leilf mihani. Once you learn out from shchita and from kabal, no. Malhan shechein to unas suffering. When it comes to both shchita and the Kabbalah, it must be done in the northern section of the Beis HaMikdash. So, and when it comes to the Zrika, obviously it's not. It's done by the Mizbech, which is not in the north. Vayishnan b'chatois hapanimis. And also, regarding the din of the chatas hapanimis, which is by the Mizbech HaZahav. Says Rashi, there is no concept of zrikas mizbech chitzon. Fine. So el aimer kra hazarik as dav hashlamim, because the pasuk says the hikru minu echad mikol carbon trumos laHashem l'koyin hazarik as dav hashlamim lo yeh. Again over here, again it doesn't say zevach shlamim, so there's another pasuk. Clearly, it's shlamim is a shlamim. So it says you have to sprinkle its blood. So there must be a zrika l'shem shlom. So why don't we just learn out from zrika that is the din, because zrika, as we see, it's not as strict. It doesn't require, again, for example, doesn't have to be shechted in the north. It doesn't have to be sprinkled in the north. So why do we need these other psukim? Misa. In a certain aspect, Zrika's dam is more strict, that when a non-Kohen does the Zrika, okay, non-Kohen's not allowed to do the Kabbalah either, but when it comes to a non-Kohen doing the Zrika, that's even worse, that you're chayv misa for that. So it's a much more significant punishment. So let's look in Rashi. V'yishin b'chatas penima. So it says zrika zar chayv lehamisa. Of a shchita ksher bazar, as we said, the kabbalah b'halacha alpha bishop sul bazar. Even though the middle two steps, the accepting the blood or walking to the mizbech, a non-kohen is not allowed to do it. Says Rashi, ein chayv lehamisa. You're not chayv misa. As the Gemara in Yoma says, the arba vodos. There's only 4 vodos that a zar is chayv lehin misa. Zrika, and it's usually the completion, as we're going to see in a second in Rashi, which the Gemara in Yoma says. Zrika, the sprinkling the blood, B'K'tayra, being maked into K'tayris, and Nisach HaMayim B'Hayayin, the water and wine libations. V'Ksib Gabi B'Hazar Karv Yumos V'Vad Tam, Avodas Matana, so it's regarding a application. It's only when you put something on, V'lo Yavod Siluk, not removing something, like for example the Lechem Apanim or something like that. The Avadatim is also Avodah Tamah, completion. So even though, again, a non-kohen is not allowed to do the catching of the blood or the bringing of the blood, but there is something after it, namely zrika. So therefore, based on the pasuk that says a zar will be killed, it's only an avoda tamah, completion, which is zrika, nothing before it. And the other ones do. But these 4, namely zrika, haktayra, nisach mayin, nisach yayin, that is something which is the conclusion. And again, Gemara over there goes into great length about that. But anyway, the point is you can't learn out from Zrika, because Zrika is even more strict than the other ones. Okay. So Ashkach and Kul. So we got 3 of them down, but when it comes to the 3rd step of bringing the dam to the Mizbech, how do we know that has to be Lishma? Who learn from these 3. Now, Malakul Shechin avoid she actual avatla. Time she actual avatla. When it comes to all these other things, you need to do it, right? However, says Rashi, if let's say Shim Ratza Shaychit B'tzad B'mizrach, excuse me, B'tzad B'mizbeach, let's say you do the Shechita Mamish right by the Mizbeach, you can sprinkle the blood, which means you did the shechita, you caught the blood, and then you sprinkle it. You don't have to go anywhere because you did it right there. And that actually would work. So there's a leniency, a huge leniency, that it's an avoda that may not even need to take place. Elomer Kram, so therefore instead we learn out from the following pasuk, Beikri Yadav, V'akar v'karayim yirchatz b'moyim, the innards and the feet, you wash with water. V'hikra b'koyin es hakoil. The koyin is makar of everything. V'hikter hamizbecha. He's makar it on the mizbech. Oiluhu isherech nechayel Hashem. That's the pasuk. So it says v'hikriv es hakol hamizbecha. V'yamar zu haylecha sivarim lekevesh. This is referring to the transporting the limbs up the ramp. V'tanya. And we also learn in a pasuk right before that, it says v'hikrivu. The pasuk says v'shachan as ben habakar lifnei Hashem, you shech the carbon v'hikrivu b'nei Aaron kohanim es adam, and they're makriv the kohanim are makriv the dam, and they sprinkle the blood on the mizbech around by the oil moyed. So the fact that it says v'hikrivu zu kabal sadam, that's referring to the sprinkling of the blood. The apek rachmana b'lashon hoylacha, it's still called hoylacha. Remember, the hoylacha lo tafka mechlal Kabbalah, that it's not excluded from the din of Kabbalah. In other words, just like Kabbalah needs to be lishma, so too the hoylacha needs to be lishma. Okay, so we got them all. So now we know from different psukim that all of the karbanos, all the stages of the karbanos must be done, and it must be lishma. Question 5. Be'elu avodas be'inon lishma l'chatchila. Shchita kabal halacha zrika. I'm not sure exactly what that question is. All of them. TA 14. Madua efshar lilmoid halacha. This is a great question. Why can't you learn halacha mishar avodos to be'inon lishma? So because halacha you don't need to do it. You can cut out the traveling. Mehecha yolf be'emes to be'inon lishma. That's a hard question. So he says. But Kabbalah v'hikrivu. It says v'hikrivu the afki b'lashon haylacha k'moy hikriv haylecha sevarim So it says by being makriv, which is the transporting of the limbs, to tell you the halacha tafka mechlal kabal. That is hard to ask the question like that, but sometimes they just ask hard questions. What can I say? Weiter. Okay, so let's keep on going. So now we have the 4 avodas. Okay, and you have to have the right intentions. Now, so now we know that when it comes to you having the wrong mindset for a particular carbon, an olav or to a shlomim, whatever, that it's that's a problem. It has to be lishma. So shini balam. And how do we know, as we saw in yesterday's daf, that there's also an issue called shini balam, namely that you have to also have the right person in mind, that this carbon is for him and not for him. So Amar Pinchas Berei de Rav Ami Yomer Kra, because the pasuk says, there's a lot of pasukim here, Ubaser Zevach Taida Shloma. When it comes to the Zevach, again it says that word just like Zevach Shlomim. Here it says Zevach Taida Shlomov. Yoim Karbano Ye'achal, on the day it should be eaten. Uyanich Menu at Biker, you can't wait till next day because otherwise it's nicer. Referring to the regarding this carbon. So what do we see? So what do we find? So he said, "Ubasar zevach taida shlamav shetehei zvicha l'shem taida," that the zvicha needs to be the sake of a current taida. Now that's shini kaidish, but it's an im enu inyan. Im enu enu shini kaidish and nakon mahasam. We already learned out before from im zevach shlamim that it's already has to be lishma. So why do we have this extra drasha again? Must be is tenu inyan lishni balam. V'hai l'hachu da'asa. Is that true? That's what come to teach us. Hamaboya l'knesanya. We need to teach us something else. Ubasar zevach taida shlama, the same pasuk. What do we know from here? Something different. Not shinoi balim, but Abba Chanina Aimer Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Bo limlid comes to tell you that taida sheshachta l'shem shlomim ksheira. A very interesting din, that even though normally you're supposed to have the right intention of the right carbon, now a taida and a shlomim are both kadashim kalim, and when it comes to a person who shechs a taida, but he's doing it thinking it's a shlomim, then it's kosher. And here's the huge chiddush. Rashi says, "Ve'ol shem chayva." Not only is it kosher, but it totally works for the person totally. Shlom shechta shem taida psul. However, if you have a shlomim which is shechted for a taida, then it doesn't work. It only works in one direction. So ma hifresh bein zelazeh. Why do we say that if you have in mind a shlomim, it works, but if you have in mind that the shlomim is a taida, doesn't? Because taida kriya shlomim, min shlomim kriya taida. A taida, another name for a taida, is a more generic word called shlomim. So therefore, even if you had the intention of the one shlomim, that also includes under an umbrella a toda. However, not the other way around. Anyway, we clearly see then that that's what we teaches this chiddush, not about shini balam. So the answer is anan mizevach kamrinan. The pasuk says zevach taida shlomov. So the fact that it says over there it says taida shlomov. Here it says zevach. So the fact that it used that word, says Rashi, drasha didan yabachanan mataida shlomov. There are two different words, two different parts of the pasuk. So you can learn out both from the same pasuk. So how do we know when it comes to a chatas and asham? Says Rashi, "Betars kohanim katani lo gabi haikra ubasu zevach taida shlomo b'yoyim karbanu ye'achal amanu l'taida she'achal yoyim v'layla." It teaches us when it comes to a carbon taida, it's eaten day and night. Chatas v'asham, which is day and night, menayin Talmud Omer zevach. So Talmud Omer zevach. So again, we need the drasha to tell us that. So im kain nichtav erka ubaser taida shlom of zevach my zevach shema minar tarti. So it's coming to tell you both things. It's coming to tell you the din of, well, really three things in this pasuk. The main one, which we're trying to get to, shini balam, teaches us that if while you have a taida, you have in mind at l'shem shlomim, it's kosher. And now also this third din, that the din also applies to a chatas and to an asham. Okay, that you have day and night to eat this carbon. Okay. and that's basically what's derived from this pasuk. Again, it says, "But yoim karbana ya'achal yanich menu ad boiker," that you don't have the next day to eat it. So that's only by shloma. How do we know the same thing as by a chatas and an asham? Okay. So ashachan zvicha. So again, when it comes to shinei balim, so I only know shchita. Sharavodus manon. V'chitem le'ev mizvicha. We can't because mizvicha shchein pasul shlo shem oichlin bepesach. Again, we already said that shchita has a kula, but also has a chumrah. And since it has this chumrah, you can't learn out from anything else. So nemer zvicha b'shinei kodesh, v'nemer zvicha b'shinei balim. Ma zvicha hamer b'shinei kodesh lo chalakta ben zvicha sharavodos. Sav zvicha hamura. So it's an interesting take that we're basically saying is that when it comes to, just like shchita, by all the avodos, the din is the same, that it has to be lishma. Shinoi kodesh doesn't work. So too, as long as you have a limud by shchita, so too it would be the same thing. All the other avodos is the same thing by shinoi bal. But ikal mifrach, mal shini kodesh, shachin psula begufa. When it comes to the shinoi kodesh, there's a psul in the carbon itself. In other words, an ola to a chatas, that in itself is a problem. And let's see, okay. So v'yishnu b'arba voidos, v'yishnu la'achar misa, v'yishnu b'tzibur kibiyachid. Okay, we need to look at all these Rashis, or else you can't really properly learn this. So what does this mean? So first of all, the Gemara is going to explain what does it mean that's a psul b'guf. There's a difference between, it's the same carbon, right? And it's for this guy as opposed to that guy, that's shinei balam, as opposed to you mamish think it's a totally different carbon. It was a chatas, but you thought it was an oila. What does it mean v'yishim b'dalad avodos? She'im shachat sholosh shmai. Let's say a person shechted a carbon without the right intention. Oh, kiba v'holach v'zar sholosh shmai, or any of the other vodos. Alva b'yishlo chishav el al shchita shelo l'shmo pasul. Even though he only had the wrong intention on one of them, one step, that will passel it. As we said before, when it comes to shinoi balim, it's only having the wrong thought when it comes to zrika. That's only time, not by the other ones. That's where it becomes the most problematic. The whole issue is at shchita is if your intention is you're thinking at the time of the shchita that I will do zrika for someone other than who this carbon is for. So even at the time of the shchita, the only time it's a problem, my shini balim, is dafka in a situation where your intention is the zrika piece. Abel says Rashi, shachat shulashim balev v'lo hisker almanas lizroik enzu machshava. It has to be almanas lizroik. The shinoi balim loy shayach bekarbon ela l'schaper boy v'kapar b'zrika. It's only by the zrika. As we're going to see later on in our parak, Nav Yud, Shim Omer Hareini Shaykhet L'Shem Ploini. I'm going to shech it for someone else. Kosher. Shachtu Almas Lizroik L'Shem Ploini Pasul. So it has to be dafka that your machshav is about the zrika. Okay? But that, of course, happens by any of the avodos. Any of the avodos, if, let's say, you're doing the Kabbalah and you're thinking at the time of the avodah of accepting the blood that I have intention when I will eventually do zrika to do it for the wrong guy, that also is a problem. But the point is, it's only the improper machshava is always about zrika, as opposed to when it comes to shini kodesh, it's about each one separately. So as long as you're shalol shma about even the shchita is you're thinking I'm shechting this as a chatas and it's really an oila, that in itself is also psul. Right, so therefore we see that difference. Furthermore, so that's what it means, Yishnu ba'arba voidos. Okay, not such a simple answer, but that's what it means. And in fact, before we even continue these Rashi, let's look straight in question 6. B'gemar amru the chamor shinui kodesh mishinui bailim shishimar voidos. Ma pira shishnu ba'arba voidos mashin b'shinui balim. Great question, because it's basically saying how well did you learn this Rashi? So. Shinui balim is only having an improper machshava about zrika during the Daled Avodos. That, for example, at the time of the Shkita, this is what he writes, but the Daled Avodos is machashiv lizoy shlo balam avishini kodesh yishnu b'chol hadaled avodos ba'atzmam. Okay, you can maybe explain that a little more cleanly, but that's what's being said. Okay. Also, v'yishnu l'achar misa. What does that mean? It says Rashi, mafarish karbano yimes v'hayoyrish makrivo shachbo shina kodesh. When it comes to a Yarish, he could be makriv it by Shini Kodesh. Of Aloy Shini Balim, Shahari Mesu Balav. Because obviously, if Shinoi Balim, so if the guy dies, so then the guy died, right? So obviously it doesn't apply. V'yishnu b'tzibor of a Shinoi. So when it comes to Shinoi, when it comes to a Shinoi Kodesh, it could be by a carbon yachid or carbon sibor. However, obviously not when we're talking about Shinui Balim, because Balim, by definition, means it's a yachid, it's an individual, so obviously it doesn't apply by its sibor. So we see distinctions between Shinui Balim and Shinui Kodesh, so you can't learn out one from the other, right? V'yishnu li'achar misa, v'yishnu b'tzibor could be yachid. When it comes to Shinui Kodesh, there's no difference between tzibor and a yachid. It's still problematic as we continue to dial them with base. Okay, you guys paying attention so far? It's not simple. V'yafa gav ditarti lav davka. So even though, says Rashi, afa gav d'maisvinan arba pirchi, even though we asked 4 questions, ikatarti she'enan ikar. There's actually 2 that are not such strong questions. We have enough questions to basically say you can't learn out Pashut from Shinoi Kodesh to Shinoi Balim. It's really not 4 questions. Why? Tarti miya davka, 2 are. So Maishna Shinoi Balim, Doloi Havi Psul Begufo. So he said, why, when it comes to Shinoi Balim, it's not there's no Psul Begufo. It's not about the carbon itself, it's about the wrong person, but not the wrong purpose. So Machshava mi Alma, so when it comes to a Machshava, Shinoi Kodesh Nami Machshava b'Almahu. It's also a just a Machshava. El kivan de achshava psula hachanami kivan de achshava pasla. Basically, that's why it doesn't count, because technically the fact you have an improper machshava, that's what passes it. So it shouldn't really matter whether it's a psula guf or not. That doesn't really make any difference. Okay. Or Pinchas bereid Rab Mari di'emer yeshini bal machar misa tartimi ikal mifrach. Because there's another point that we said when it comes to achar misa, there's a difference between Shinoi Kodesh that it can still be brought by the Yarshim, but not by the Baalim, because the Baal died. But according to one opinion, there is Shinoi Baalim Achar Misa. We'll have to obviously understand how that works. Gemara is going to get into that, like who's bringing it, right? If he's dead, but nonetheless, Mia ikal tarti mia ikal mifrach. So the point is, you can't learn out one from the other. El Rabashi Makra. So we learn out from the following pasuk in Vayikra: V'samach yado aroisha oila, that you have to before the shechita you put your hands on the carbon oila. V'nirtzel l'chaper a love, and it's a kapara, and it says a love for him. V'lo al chaver, and that's someone else. So v'hai l'hachu da'asa hamaboy l'sanya. I thought we needed to teach us a different drush. It says v'nirtzel l'chaper love. What do we want out from there? Rav Shimon Omer et esh love chayav b'achriyuso. On him, the one who made the vow, is chayav b'achriyusai. So, for example, if he made a nedava and said, let's say, for example, he made a neder, he said, I'm accepting something upon myself. He said, harilai oila, so he's chayav b'achriyus. However, is shenu olav enu chayav b'achriyuso. If it's someone else's, then you're not chayav to replace it. Which the way that means is if it's a neder, then it's chayav b'achriyuso. However, Rashi says she'enu a love. For example, it's a nadava, so you said zu, right? In other words, a love means you put it upon yourself. When you say on myself, it's saying alai, on me, as opposed to zu. In that situation, you're not chayav b'achriyus. That's what it's come to tell you. The Yom Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, my time, Kivan the Yom Olai. Once you say it's upon me, it's commanded toinle a kasvedam. It's like you put it on your shoulders. Basically, you accepted responsibility for it. But that's what we're coming to teach us. Not this whole din about shinoi balim, but rather it's come to tell us the din of different dafkim between neder and nadava. So Rav Ashi mivanirtza lo yilchaper kaimer. So he says that this word loy is to say that to you it's mechaper, but not to someone else. So you can learn that from a different drasha, but again, that's how we learn this. Okay, and this is also quoted in Gemara Megillah. Okay, Ashachan Zvicha Bezrika Kabbalah Manayim. How do we know when it comes to, so that was, we already knew Shchita, and now we just learned Zvicha, Zrika. So how do we know Kabbalah? So maybe we can learn from that. No, we can't, as we said before. These are avoidos that are chayiv b'chutz. Let's go straight into Rashi. Actually, we didn't see this before. Asher yishchad mechutz machnet, shechted outside. Bezarek nami marbinan lay, and we're rolling out zricha from there too. Dam shavach rabas hazayrek, sprinkling the blood outside. Like shchutei chutz, rika as well. It's learned out. Timer b'kabbalah b'hayulacha shin chayved b'chutz. The isser of shchutei chutz is what we call it. Is also by zrikas chutz. However, we don't have the same din when it comes to the other avodos. So therefore, we're more strict when it comes to those two. So Elam Rav Ashi Asya Me'el Nazir. We can learn out from the ram of the Nazir at the end of his Naziros. The chsiv that the pasuk says, Yasa Ayel Yasa Zevach Shlomim Lashem, that the Nazir has to bring the ayil. It says Yasa to do this. It'll be done as a Zevach Shlomim. Al Salha Matzais together with breads. Yasa Kainas Minchaso V'Yas Nischai. He brings the flour and the libations together. That's the chiyuv of the nazir. Shetei siyasol l'shem shlomim. The fact is yasa that tells you it has to be done l'shem shlomim. But that's only teaches us again about a carbon. So again, it's imen inu, imen inu, imen inu l'shinu kodesh, and not email hasam. We already learned it out. So to an in l'shinu bailam. So we Rabbacha berei. So Omer le Rav Acha bar Abel Rava. Ema, why don't we say the word yasa in this pasuk regarding the nazir? Klal. That's a general word. Zevach is prat. Klal uprat ein b'cha el mashur prat. You only include what is like the prat. Zvicha in midach rein eloi. So it's only zvicha and that's it, because that's what the pasuk is talking about. It says yes, hayasa zevach shlomim, right, which is talking about the zvicha. So it's a klal uprat, and that's the din when it comes to a klal prat. So we're very exclusive. So therefore, maybe only only the shechita requires lishma. Now, iksiv yasa shlomim zevach kedekami. You'd be right, but hashel iksiv yasa zevach shlomim havili klal she'enu mole. It's a klal that's not complete. V'chol klal she'enu mole. We don't use a klal prat in that situation. Okay. So that is an interesting rule. Says Rashi, enu mole v'lo nismal devar v'hashlam. Okay. Ravina oimer oilam donin. Really, you should still call the klal prat. And therefore, how do we learn out from here? However, lahashem chaz v'klal. So therefore, that causes it now to be like a klal prat, a klal, and now it's ke'ena prat. Okay, so Armuli Ravacha Medifti Ravina Ibaholo Dami Klal Kamala Klal Batra. You have to have the klal on both sides. They have to be somewhat similar. But Baha Dami Klal Kamala Klal Basra. Klal Kam, the first one is Marba Asiyos Vasulo. It's only coming to include activities of the avoda. Klal Batra. Koil Hashem, anything which is to Hashem. V'yafil shvichas shirayim, even the spilling of the leftover blood. Vaktaris emurim, and also bringing of the sacrificial parts. So they're not similar. So Hatana Rabbi Shmuel b'chlali prati darish ki hagavna. In this situation, we do darshan klal pratu klal yata dan elkena prat. Ma prat maforish avoida uve'inan lishma. So av kol avoda ve'inan lishma. That's how we learn it out. So ma prat maforish avoida v'chayv lehem b'chutz. So the things that we learned out before is your chayiv shchuti chutz and zrika chutz. So I have kol avoda v'chayiv l'chutz. So shchita was zrika in Kabbalah halacha lo. So you can't learn this out because it's not true. Because Kabbalah and halacha, there is no din of these avodos outside of the base of mikdash. It's only shchita and zrika that we say. So inami, furthermore, ma pramaforish davar hatoin safoin. When it comes to these first steps, it requires the north. The yishnu b'chatos apnimus. I've called toin safoin v'yishnu b'chatos apnimus. Shchita v'kabal in zrika lo. We know that zrika is not done in the north. So ikol meimar hachi, v'ikol meimar hachi. You can say this or that. So shikoyel and hin, they're both equal. V'yavo shnei, and they can learn out both. So it's an interesting idea. Says Rashi, hamidai shavos v'hai minayu mafkas I darsha ha anadishal ida chilkach yavo shneihem v'hoylcha al karcha lo tafka mechal kabbalah. So we're not going to exclude it. Okay. Lish nachrina. So lish nachrina v'chada tiku b'milsa. So you have each one stays in its place, and therefore that is what happens. So basically just another way of framing it. Okay. Ibois Ayama Zrika Ravashi Nafka. We're going to have Zrika from Ravashi. Ashkan Ayel Nazir, Shar Shlomo, and how do we know it comes to other karbanos in the same din? Vachitem we yell El Nazir. So Ma'la El Nazir Shchen Yeshimo Damem Acher. When it comes to the ram of the Nazir, there are other karbanos that are brought as well. So maybe you can't learn out from the El Nazir. Im Kenech of Shlomim, Ma Shlomim, or Rabbis, Kol Shlomim, it's come to include all Shlomim, Sashlim Shlomim, Shar Kol Kadashim, Minon, had no other karbanos. So he came Alel Mishlomim, Mal Shlomim Shachin to Unin Smich and the Sachim, Tenuf and Chazda Shaik, right? All these different things, as opposed to, for example, Meiser and Bechor, do not need these things. So Akisha and Akasa with Shlomim, Ma Shlomim. So why is Shlomim mentioned next to all these other things? Comes to compare them. That just like a Shlom we said, Ben Shuni Kaddish, Ben Shuni Baal. So what we said before, we already know Bein L'Shma, Av Kol. So when it comes to all the other karbanos, Ben Shuni Kaddish, Ben Shuni Baalim, Bein L'Shma. So Ema Heichad Shachadahu Shul L'Shma Lissel. Why don't we say, unlike our Mishnah, that if you would shecht it Shul L'Shma, that's possible. Why does our Mishnah say that it's kosher, but it's just not oil l'shem chayva? So Omer Kra, because this is the pasuk we had before a couple dafim ago, Moises v'secha tishmi avasisa kashin didarta, which is kind of hard to understand. On one hand, it talks about a neder, and then it talks about a nadava. So hai nadava nederhu. So which one is it? Is it a neder or a nadava? One's an olai and one's zu. Not the same thing. Ella im kamash nadarta sisa. We went out from here that even if when it comes to having the wrong machshava by shchita, you should still have the proper machshavas by everything else. So it says if you had the proper intention, it's a neder. Yeh neder. V'imla, but if your intention by shchita was for it to be nadava, yeh nadava, which means that you can still continue to bring it. Obviously means it's kosher. It's just not going to be oil l'shem chayva. So we went out from that. We went out from something important from this pasuk we just established, that the din is that it's kosher. The Israch Zois HaTorah, and we also need the pasuk of Zois HaTorah. If you only had this pasuk Havamina, you would think, as we continue in Hamad Aleph, you would think Lo Yada B'mai, right? Maybe it's not about Lishma. We don't know what it's actually even talking about, right? It says Rashi, because the whole Ksib Hedya the high krab avoidos lishman. That pasuk, it talks about a neder and dove, but doesn't really tell you anything about lishma. The dimulav lishman mishtoikra. How do we the pasuk tell lishma? So kasrach one is zayis hatayra. So zayis hatayra, in that situation, as we went out from Shlomim, it's coming to tell you this long pasuk, right? That just like by Shlomim, it's talking about it has to be lishma. That's what it means. Because Rahman is I've only had that. How we mean the lift soil, you think mamish it's not good at all and be possible. Because Rahman so therefore they kind of like they balance each other out. On one hand, we went out from one pasuk that it's kosher. The other pasuk, because if you didn't have that, you would maybe have no idea even what it's talking about. So therefore, that's why you need both. Okay, we're going to stop there. Maybe we'll have another question. Did we see question TA 14? That was a very hard question as we did. Let's maybe take a peek at TB 16. Mahadin toida l'shem shlomim shlomim l'shem toida. That's actually a simple question, but it's kind of like hidden in here. So this is TB 16. These are the types of questions which are easy if you know it. So the din is that if your intention is for it to be a shlomim, it's a taida, but you think it's a shlomim, then it works. Because a taida kriya shlomim. However, if it's taka shlomim, and you say this is going to be a taida, so that's much more limited, if you will, and a shlomim is not called a taida, therefore it would be pasal ad kan.